talk about LEC finals?
Sure, let's do it.
Because here's the sad thing. I know everyone got hyped and everyone wants to believe that, like, oh, Fnatic really could have done it. It's like, yeah, but the problem is that final reminded me of all the other series Fnatic played where it's like, they're in kit. These guys can't do 3 good games in a row. It isn't in their fucking DNA. Like, it's in their DNA. They must have one game they just meg it in or fuck up completely after 10 minutes. So, like, the real sad thing to me is I still actually believe it would have been better if Mad Lions has gone there. I actually think Mad Lions was the team that had a chance to do something. So, fair play that Fnatic got through another insane 3-2 series. By the way, there's one thing we should probably address first of all. Everyone else is so over this, Monte. They don't have a problem with that Wunder thing. I do. Because you know what, Monte? The way Wunder actually played by the end, by the time he was in the final, like, I don't know that Oscarinen would have done that. Remember, Oscarinen's a rookie. Bro, he only came into the lineup, like, what, split in half ago or something? Like, we're just taking for granted he would have done everything Wunder did or better. I don't know that that's the case. I actually think, like I say, aside from maybe what the first 2 games he played all together when he came back, Wunder's looked pretty good, mate. His levels got better and better and better. And by the end, he actually did become the kind of factor that he should be. Like, he can just win you a game himself. He can give you a draft edge. Like, I think that's one thing I have a problem with is like this isn't even Fnatic. This isn't even their real lineup, guys. Why would we pretend like it is?
I mean, I think we saw at least the floor of Wunder within this series, which obviously we expected to be very high. Now, the fact of the matter is that he literally was on like Renekton Ornn duty for the entirety of his time with
understandably, yeah.
So, and I don't blame that as a concept.
A good approach.
Basically, he is weak side. That's it. That's what Renekton Renekton can strong side too, but that's not the way they were playing, right? And the thing about Renekton is that he weak sides and gets advantages and causes pressure on that side of the map. And Ornn obviously weak side survives and then powers up into the late game in order to give you more carry potential. It also means that he didn't have to practice very many champions, and he didn't have to practice really a lot of coordination in the early game with his teammates. So I think from the coaching side, this was a very clever way to integrate him into the roster when he hadn't been an active pro player. You just basically say, look, dude, you're going to be on an island. We're going to play a couple champions with you. This is just how it's going to be. He as a player, it's a knowledge of who he is as a player. He as a player is a very good weak side player. He's a very stable player who is going to have good map awareness and be able to contribute with teleport in team fights later on in the game. Like, you can trust his veteran sensibilities later on and for him to team fight effectively. So I think it was good. Do I think that it's impossible to know how Oscarinen would have done, especially because, as you point out, he's a rookie, and this would have been his first stadium experience. I mean, this is Wunder's 1 millionth rodeo in a stadium.
That's one MSI, for fuck's sake. I know.
Yeah. So, you know what you're getting. And, I mean, I still think it's egregious. There was another thread I saw today that popped up on Reddit that I had the misfortune of opening and reading a few comments about how, how was Wunder allowed to be on this roster? And that's still the question that nobody has addressed, including the
yeah.
So how come Max the X or the new LEC commissioner don't say anything about this substitution, which was made after roster lock occurred? It's completely ridiculous. Guys.
By the way, the most conspicuous thing, Monte, is that they can't just give a simple answer. Remember, if this is all above board, you just tell us I'm doing it for reason X, for this reason Y, and in the future, here's the precedent. Problem solved.
And here's the issue, again, is that there was no announcement about this whatsoever. At least there was an announcement for the Danny substitution that happened. But
even then, though, I believe the announcement was still on Reddit, though, Monte. That's the other thing. The other thing that Riot does in the modern days, none of this stuff goes in the archive. It doesn't go on LOL Esports. Like, this is happening for that's why it actually looks sus. It almost looks like they think they're sneaking it through the line, like Riot themselves. Like, what?
And to all those people saying like, oh, well, it's not. Here's the common argument, which is that Fnatic has an academy team, but LEC teams are not forced to have an academy team. Therefore, Fnatic shouldn't be forced to field an academy player. True, 100%, 100% true. But here's the thing, guys. All teams are forced to have substitute players.
There you go.
You use the substitute player that is on your roster. That is what you do.
This just goes back to what we said on the Danny one, which is just make every team have to have a declared sub for each position. Problem solved.
Yeah.
Problem solved. Well, it won't be problem solved because you have to use that player, but in theory, it'd be problem solved. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to use that player, but that's the fair thing to do.
It is.
And that also, by the way, rewards teams who want to spend the money to have an academy roster. It rewards them. It provides a very material benefit. Not that, you can't just go out and sign some Wunder because he's available, or switch out Danny for an AD carry who's actually better in the meta that you're playing in. I mean, that whole premise was ridiculous, and it is a breach of competitive integrity. And the reason why, I can just tell you, the reason why Riot does these things is because in the Danny case, they didn't want EG to show up to a stadium event, which was the lower bracket final that EG was in, and play an uncompetitive match when that was the event, it was an entire day, the Saturday, that they had sold tickets for. That is why, because they didn't want to have this, potentially bad matchup when they had sold tickets. And guess what, guys? It's the same shit here. They don't want Fnatic to perform badly with their fan base and bomb out of this tournament because they were forced to use the substitute that they had listed on their roster. So this is all very cynical. And by the way, guys, I'll tell you this. Behind the scenes in LCS, now I don't know about LEC this time, when the Danny substitution occurred, teams were pissed. They were pissed because this was really unfair.
Extra dirty as well, as is because there was the whole mental health ambience around it. No one wanted to wade into that and be the bad guy.
They didn't want to say anything.
Yeah, it was just the logic was it's just bad PR. Like you're not going to win, and you're just going to look like a bad guy, basically, right?
Yes, the team said the people, teams told me we are very angry about this, but we can't make this a public issue because we will look like the bad guys.
Yes.
Saying that, mental health isn't important, which obviously is a massive buzzword on the internet that people love to get angry about these days. So they just decided to let it be. And at the end of the day, EG lost, and it wasn't as big of a deal, but it was pretty shitty for the teams that were competing.
Oh, absolutely.
And now in retrospect, it looks really bad that they didn't say anything, because had they said something at the time, perhaps we would have had some of these rules changed.
I mean, I'll even go one further. Like, in the end, it wasn't like, you could maybe argue, maybe Mad Lions might think, hey, I'd rather just the Oscar Aaron guy played and we'd have the real team. Aside from that one, because you did win that series. The other reason why people aren't realizing what a big deal this is, Monty, is what if this wasn't like the G2 that they're playing now? What if this actually was just a normal LEC team? And there's a world where Wunder could have won this fucking title, mate, as a potentially ineligible player, like you're saying. Like, what the fuck would that be? Like, the joke is, by the final, wasn't he the best player in Fnatic pretty much? Like, he was pretty good in the final. Like, if they were against a lesser team, they could have won that shit. That could have just been a championship. Yeah, and at the end, we're all just going to ignore that. Is he even eligible to win the championship? As he's lifting the trophy. What? That can't be it, right? It can't have that.
Well, and I'm not going to make the argument that Fnatic broke Oscarinen's hand or anything like that. Of course not. But we don't have the story on that, and Dom has repeatedly said that whatever story that is completely ridiculous. So, if it was something that Oscarinen did stupidly to himself, that's just an injury.
Why do you get benefit if you're Fnatic?
Why do you get benefit if you're Fnatic? If your player is doing something dumb, that becomes an internal matter for you to solve as part of Fnatic. And as I've said before, injuries happen in sports. Injuries happen. Did Faker get to sign some crazy... Did T1 sign some crazy free agent to replace Faker? No, they fucking took Poby off their academy roster and put him in and lost a bunch of games with him because Faker was injured, and that was their reserve player. Okay, so why do all these different leagues have different substitution rules? It's nutty. You have substitutes or you don't.
That would be like if when Faker was injured, that T1 was able to just have fucking Doinby fly. Give a sick example here. Fly in and be the only other human ever who could maybe do Faker's style. And then they're even better, Monty, and make the final off it. The Jokers didn't make the final anyway, but that would be mad egregious. The fuck. He's just sitting out there.
That's a great example. These things don't happen, right? And I don't understand. I do understand. The reason is viewership and people attending these events. But it's very cynical in that case. And they have chosen, and this is all you need to know about Riot, they have chosen this path over competitive integrity. That is what they have done. And it
by
is
the way,
blatantly obvious.
You know, when everyone does that snark thing they all do on the internet, where, like, you know, famously, if anyone ever makes like $1 million, Monty, all those moron fans who themselves spend like $300 of like the, you know, 400 they make in a month on a skin in the game, suddenly they become financial experts on Monty and they go, $1 million, he could be set for life if he invests that, right? And they act like they'd be all smart and do it like that, right? When they talk about this analogy like that, they're missing that, like, that's exactly what we're referring to now. Like, there is a world in which you might not think this is plausible, but absolutely there are people who, like, if the stakes get big enough, I can tell you from sports, there are people who would break someone's leg if it meant you could get a better player and win the championship. Or the other one, here's another one I think's mad. You're all thinking, but they all make like $20,000 a month. If I was doing that, I'd sit and be really careful. You wouldn't, because if you're a young idiot, you do what they do. But I do think, as a quick aside, one thing that is mental to me, Monty, is the amount of young stars in esports and people whose job is esports that I've seen who take no consideration into the idea their hands are their livelihood. I think it's crazy, mate. Like, the worst is easily my native game of Counter-Strike. This is not a joke. I once went to an after, I think Richard might have told this story on his stream before. I once went to an after party in Counter-Strike where the actual organizer of the after party, the TO Monty, arranged for one of those boxing machines to be there where you punch it as hard as possible and it goes up to me. I was watching all the greatest Counter-Strike players in the world go up with their dominant hand and punch a machine while drunk as hard as possible. And I remember just looking around like, I can't be the only one seeing this. Like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't think like night before, like a big fucking orchestra, symphonic orchestra players, they're all punching a fucking machine like that. Come on, everyone. Oh, come on, you fucking pussy.
It's also,
come on.
it's also, as I've said,
so
in violation of their contracts.
It probably is, yeah.
There are clauses in these contracts that say things like, you can't skateboard, you cannot ski, you can't skydive, which, by the way, is hilarious because that's 100% in the CLG players' contracts that Riot took skydiving. You can't skydive. That's in the because you want to protect your players' assets. But meanwhile, Poom and Dokla are off going skydiving with Dash as part of content. When I saw that, I was like, surely that is a contract violation. Oh, it's okay though. If Riot does it, it's okay. If those players actually, broke something on landing that caused them not to be able to play the game of League of Legends anymore, yeah, it's fine because we did it for the content. So yeah, I think that whole thing is just completely absurd. And yeah, I mean, would Riot have allowed illegal substitutions in that instance because the content that they were making was the cause of an injury for a player? But these players are not allowed to do these things for that exact reason. And it totally makes sense why this would not be allowed, right? You don't want the player that you're paying a significant amount of money for to suffer an injury through an unforced error. But it is wild to hear that they had this punching machine at a drinking party for
that's
so crazy.
Steve Sports in it.
I wish we had a recording of that just to watch pro players try and punch something. It would be really funny. But yeah, I mean, this is all to say, like, we can talk about the LEC final some more because it was, at the end of the day, this, I think, was a predictable matchup. Fnatic had kind of showed their hand over the 10 games they had played previously. I think G2 had a very good read. I was laughing that some predictions were 3-0 because there's no universe in which this is a 3-0 because here's what happens, guys. There are only two scenarios with G2. One of which is they have a slow start and they lose a long grind out game and then turn it on for the rest of the series. The other option is they go up 2-0, they troll one game, may get close to winning it but lose, and then they just turn on the Jets and win the fourth game of the series. They happy game like a motherfucker. They're not
they must have
a
done
clean
that
team.
5 series in the last 2 months alone. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Like, anybody who thought they were going to 3-0 just doesn't know G2. And it doesn't matter that they're in a final. The happy gaming will commence. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, we start to see, here comes the Yone in the third game of the series. Here comes the, potential inting in bot lane and feeding of Noah, like, completely ridiculous. And then guess what? Next game, it's not even close. It is a complete stomp. Not from the start. I mean, mistakes were made with the level 1 and flashes being blown, but they turned it on after that. They won their really strong 3v3 with Rel, Draven, and Leona into the Ivern, Xayah, Nautilus in the bot lane, took complete advantage of that, snowballed out of the bot lane, and Caps had some nice roams, and, that was pretty much it. I think the Taliyah pick, when you pick it alongside the Ivern on red side, like it's not a flex pick anymore. And even though I really liked what Razork was doing with Taliyah earlier in the series, the thing about Taliyah jungle, and the only other team that really does this at this point in time is D+. So Canyon, Canyon and Showmaker flex the Taliyah back and forth, and that's something that we've seen over the course of this summer. But the thing about Taliyah is that she's pretty shit early, and she's incredibly susceptible to invades and falling behind. And her clear speed isn't even that fast until you start to get like 4 or 5 points into her queue. And we just saw a very developed game plan when Razork was playing it in game 2 of this series of we are going to aggressively invade. We're going to push in our top lane with Olaf. Broken Blade's going to come down. Yike is going to provide the CC. It's going to be very, very difficult for Taliyah to farm. So we didn't get to see like the mega Taliyah game that he had, in game 1 versus Mad Lions, where he was able just to kind of farm it out and get these huge advantages. And I think it was a spectacular game from him, by the way. I love seeing Taliyah jungle. It's one of my favorite.
Razork's mega. He actually low-key might be the best EU jungler now. He's just really good, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, despite the fact that he still can't play League of Legends with Humanoid, but at least he has Trimby now.
In spite of that. In spite of that, exactly.
At least he has Trimby now, or at least Humanoid has Trimby now, I should say. It's more accurate. Trimby rocks up to mid lane and gets
Humanoid. It's really is gank mid for Humanoid. It is if you watch him play that. It's actually his job. And then let Razork just do something else on the map, I guess.
Just Razork farm on Taliyah until he shows up with 2,000 more gold than the enemy jungler. Yeah, so I mean, I really like Taliyah jungle, and I really like teams that can flex it. And it's been fun seeing Razork play all these AP junglers throughout the playoffs. But I do think that it was a very clear game plan against this that we saw from G2, and they have been really good at getting these reads on their opponents. And so in spite of the fact that this did go to 4 games, I don't really think of game 3 as a super serious game from G2, but they showed a lot of
won that, like you said. There were points where they could have won that too, mate.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they could have won that game. Yeah, they could have won that game.
Well, the big deal for me in the final, this is actually one thing I was quite happy though. At least it fucking hell, it feels like it's been forever. This was actually like a really good Caps performance. Like it was just game to game, just a very good player again. Like if people don't know, even though G2's been this dominant force, he actually hasn't had to do that very often at all this year. Like most times it is other people who are the best players. Like it's like people were saying on Twitter, the crazy thing about this final was it was like inverted. Like Caps actually was the main carry, and actually Mickey X had like sort of an off series. Like it's like the one series this year, he just sort of like was whatever. He was just all right, wasn't he?
I mean, I think he had some strong games, but yeah, I think overall it was not his strongest performance. Not to say he was bad by any means. I mean, we got to see the fucking awesome Lissandra support into Rakan again, which seems to be working really well for them. Did he kind of int later in that game? Yeah, there's some happy gaming towards the end of game 2, but they still closed it in 25 minutes. But there was some like overextension and trolling, but that's just who G2 is. You just have to accept that that's who G2 is and move on with your life. They do have a good time at times, and they're not the cleanest teams because they're fucking around and toying with their opponents. And that was a case of that. But yeah, I think Caps had a strong series, got to show a pretty good variety of champions in his pool, including like he was the one who was answering with the Syndra by the end of this series. They did a good job playing around him. Yike had some really good games as well. Like his Rel engages oftentimes were really good in this series. And this is something that we've been talking about, but Yike's ability to be an engaged tank jungler has improved over the course of summer, whether it's Sejuani or Rel or Maokai. This has been his primary job for the last couple of months, and he has struggled at first, but has slowly kind of eased his way into that and learned and grown from this role. So I've been impressed by his growth as a player. And then, of course, Hansama, Broken Blade, both really good. Broken Blade has been the best top laner in Europe this summer, which is amazing after the kind of spring performance he had, but he really powered up in playoffs and then into MSI, and he's been riding that high ever since. So I think G2 overall is looking really good heading into Worlds. I think they're looking good.
No complaints. I agree. Actually, the Broken Blades had like the last sort of split, and then now this split for finals. He's been awesome. He's been easily the best. I mean, the joke is this is actually the compliment if you're Broken Blade. I've watched all the shitters like Evie when they play Cassante. They're just all right on it. When Broken Blade plays Cassante, people just do all that spam where it's like, did 2,700 damage and has an airborne. And like, when they do the spam, that's a sign you actually played the champion well, because I've seen a lot of people play that just average. He's pretty good on it, actually. He's been pretty good in general.
Yeah, I think the thing with Cassante is you really do have to have a good sense of positioning and how to charge up your Qs and then how to use your ultimate effectively, because he's not he basically is he's an inventor of skirmishes. It's not a great like front to back 5v5 team fighting tank. It's a great champion at creating skirmishes and breaking up fights, but it requires you and your team to position well around that and to isolate somebody over the wall and potentially have one of your teammates go with you to kill that person quickly. Also, it does snowball very hard. I mean, he is, if you get an advantage on him, he does snowball really, really, really pretty hard. So anyway, I don't think he's as broken as other people say it is. Just that copy pasta from Showmaker is fun to type. And it is funny.
Because I think the problem is people who are experts don't know. When you do memes like that, but you would mean it like tongue in cheek, you don't really mean it's OP. Plebs just read that and actually think you mean it for real. It's why like half the time, like some of the times the Yumi champion's been complained about me, it wasn't even the thing you could just blind. It was like in certain angles it was OP, but because the meme was like, you just, oh my God, 200, it's like the Athenios 200 years meme. People just hear the meme and then repeat it. It's like, it's not even that bad now. I do think Cassante, like, I mean, luckily it will obviously be sorted out soon, but that was an OP champion at times this year, though. That's the problem. Because the problem I had was when it was bad players playing it and they were just raising their floor, okay. The problem is when really good players played it, it was fucking OP. It reminds me in that sense, this is a fucking reach, but I don't care. It reminds me back in the day of Riven in that sense, Monte. Because if you ever saw a good Riven play, it looks broken as shit. But if someone couldn't do all the like chaining all the animation cancel, then it wasn't that OP. It was like just like a not very good champion even in the game. And the joke is you wouldn't pick it in a pro game. It's just people like Faker would just crack out their mind so they could, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not a bad analogy. And yeah, I think Broken Blade performed really. I mean, people are going to remember the game where he got super far ahead and then just hard carried, right? And they will quite easily forget like the last game of this series where he did fine, but it wasn't just, or even the game that they lost, right? It was his game one performance that he just got a super big lead on and took over the entire game, which can happen. But there were other Cassante games in the series that were much less, I would say, I don't want to use the word impressive, but egregious from a balance perspective. It didn't look that OP, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think G2 did really well. I think they were very prepared for their opponents. They showed a good variety of strategies. This was, again, credit to the coaching staff. I think that their ability to quickly read their opponents and pick them apart is pretty damn good. That's very impressive. So Dylan Falco killing it yet again with this roster, team stepping up. And what we need is all of these players to be on form for Worlds, which they were at least in this series. Like we didn't see any kind of terrible performances from any particular player over the course of the series. Like they don't have an obvious, I won't say they have an obvious strong point compared to the Asian teams that are going, because player for player, they're probably still worse than a lot of the Chinese and Korean teams that are going to be attending this tournament. But in Swiss, I think there's a chance that they steal games against the Asian teams. It's possible in a best of one for sure.
I mean, to me, like I say, I think Mickey X is the X factor, because unlike certain other players, this guy isn't a rookie in any context. Like the joke is, I actually think Mickey X is better at support than some of the support players on some of the Asian teams. Like some of their players are rookies or people who have limited experience, or they're the passenger and it's like the ADC leads the lane. Like Mickey X is like a guy who's a real playmaker. He's been impervious to the meta this year, and he's already someone with like real experience internationally. He's played this guy, like, let's be real, off the top of my head, he must have played like 20 international best of 5 or something. Like this guy's got a fucking career under his belt, guys.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think he's our one chance in the West. Like if that player actually pops off, or as you even saw, dude, he was even doing it in this fight. He still picks the Lissandra support, etc. Like he's really done his best to like expand his champion pool, really show that he can play whatever. And crucially as well, this is why I actually think the Dylan Falco angle is a good one. I know from past teams, there have been teams, let's say certain Fnatic lineups where certain players would actually like draft limit people like Dylan Falco and they couldn't pick more. Like you've got a player who he can only play 2 champions in this angle. The other thing I noticed about this lineup of G2, even more so than the one last year, is they seem super open whatever the coach wants to draft, mate. They all are willing to play all these weird picks and off meta ones and unusual combos and that, like the super strong Asian one. They've actually been fairly willing to experiment the last few months in general. So it's brilliant if you're a coach and you actually have players who buy into your system, you know?
I also think that the most important job that he has, because his players are very smart, very, long-term veterans who are going to be able to find these angles. He lets them cook, but just enough, right? He doesn't over-egg the pudding. He will stabilize any weird picks with some more normal picks on the rest of the team composition, right? Or he'll let them have a good lane matchup, but their win condition with some of the other champions won't fundamentally change, right? So he'll kind of slot in a champion, and if it's good for creating picks like Lissandra, then they might play like a kind of pick style composition around the Lissandra, so the win condition is a little bit more clear. And I think that's really the strength there, is like you get the disruptiveness of some of these picks, and you get the surprise factor of giving your opponent's champions, powerful champions in the meta while having counter picks, but you don't like go completely ham and make win conditions super weird or change the way the team plays on a fundamental level with their win condition. So that's what I think is really good about him kind of reining it in a little bit.
I do definitely, though, in the Swiss system, want to see them against at least one Asian elite team. I want to see them pull out a Driven.
I think they will.
Just for the hype. Come on, we got it.
I mean, I think they will absolutely do that. They're not a team that's afraid to take risks, which I think is another thing. And they're very confident in their abilities. I think the Draven would absolutely come out if it's not banned, especially in a best of one. I could absolutely see that happening. I also want to remind people that G2 is actually low-key one of the best level 1 teams in the world. And so you just have to have one set play around a level 1 that gets some really big advantages. I mean, look at KT. They basically lost the playoffs from having garbage level 1s at times and like put themselves in these giant holes in these games. Like KT is a team you could easily exploit with a creative level 1 and actually take a win off in a best of 1, I think. So
Indeed.
There are some angles for you, just providing the hopium to European fans.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.